Hi, and thank you for joining us. A warm welcome to all our members, our friends, and our viewers across Europe from the European Movement International offices here in Brussels. First of all, Happy New Year. Warm wishes to all of you. We hope that 2021 has started well and it's going to be a healthy and happy year for all of us. This is our first discussion for EuropeanChats of the year. Those of you who have participated before know that we gather voices from across the European Movement Network, from all over Europe and across society to discuss some of the most important issues currently on the agenda. And to kick off the year, we have invited two really important stakeholders from different sides of society. We have with us Valeria Ronzitti, who is the Secretary General of SGI Europe. And of course, we have with us Luca Visentini, who is the Secretary General of the European Trade Union Confederation. Both of them representing employers and employees, by representing huge constituencies around Europe, who every day work to make our continent a better place. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us. Happy New Year to you too, and looking forward to our discussion. And perhaps I'll start with you, Valeria, and take a look at what happened at the very end of our previous year. After a long process, the European Union agreed on a recovery fund, a very ambitious financial instrument to help Europe get out of the current health crisis and the economic crisis that has followed. What's your view? What's your organization's view, your members' view of the agreement, and how can we make the most of it?
Thank you, Petros, and thank you for the invitation. Happy New Year to everybody. And indeed, SGI Europe is happy and proud about the result because also together with the trade unions, I think we contributed quite massively to arrive at even thinking about the recovery plan as it was Next Generation EU, as it was agreed, linked with the MFF. Of course, we would have liked even more progress. We think that the work made between the proposal by the Commission, then what agreed by the Council, and finally the intervention of the Parliament, all in all give us a very good outlook for the future. But the paper is not enough just to say, I mean, we really have the chance to make a Next Generation EU a game changer for Europe and for national politics too. So it's now really the time to work with our members, with our counterparts also at the national level, and join forces to make sure that this Next Generation EU is not just a nice name, buzzword found here in Brussels, but really bring us to a new paradigm to conceive national and European politics in all fields, but with a specific focus on social and macroeconomic fields.
Indeed, and as we have all noticed, the past year has been a particularly difficult one for the economy and society at large, but there are many who fear that the real punch is going to come this year in 2021. Do you think, Valeria, I'll stay with you for a moment, that Europe is able and ready to deal with the aftershocks of what took place last year?
Is now or never. Is really, I think 2021 is the year of the crossroad for Europe. If we are not, and is we, because it's not Europe, something else, is we, if we are not able, institutions, social partners, civil society, to demonstrate that we are able to face and tackle the consequences of the crisis, it will never be again. But I want to be positive in acknowledging that there is a much more favorable, fertile ground from the institutional level, both from the Commission and the Council side. The President of the Council are showing us a will that I never saw before. And there are some plans we can speak about afterwards if you want, that really give me the sign that we are able to enter a new cycle. One of those plans is to find a way to differently calculate GDP in a way that would finally take into account the welfare measures at the national level. And this is something that some of our membership, some of the trade union membership, civil society has been working for decades. And finally, the European institutions are listening to it and ask us to put this into practice. So I see really good sign for the future.
Thank you. Luca, as Valeria said, you were intimately involved in a lot of the discussions. Do you mind also sharing your view? How do you consider the recovery package? Was it a success? And then, just like Valeria, tell us what are your hopes and aspirations for the implementation of the package?
Hi, everybody, and of course, Happy New Year also from my side, and thank you for inviting me to this very interesting discussion. Yeah, I think that Valeria is right. This recovery strategy, I would say, because it's a comprehensive strategy put in place by the European Union, we have to be proud of it and also proud of ourselves for having contributed positively to designing this strategy for the future. I would say there are two main big values in this strategy. The first one is that for the first time ever, after decades of endless and absolutely useless to some extent, even with no result discussions about the possibility to have a communitarian approach facing a crisis, finally, because of COVID, unfortunately because of COVID, but at the same time it was also the only possibility for unlocking, let's say, the institutional discussion. For the first time after years and years, it was possible to achieve it, this communitarian approach, to have a recovery plan and recovery facilities that are really of a huge size in terms of the quantity of money, in terms of the solidarity mechanisms that are at the core of these strategies, the fact that a large part of this money will come to the member states through grants without increasing excessively national public debt, that the money will be raised in the financial markets by the European Commission through de facto Eurobonds, although nobody wants to call it like them, but de facto they are Eurobonds. So we have managed, really to square the circle. So to have finally a really communitarian crisis management approach with a recovery fund that is really ambitious in terms of size, but also in terms of the way the governance of the fund will work. And the other big value of this recovery strategy is that it's really looking at the future. There is really a vision about a new, more sustainable, more inclusive economic model, more inclusive economic growth model that is not only based on GDP, as Valeria said, no more back to business as usual, but really the capacity to have a vision and to design the future, including when the recovery strategy will have to tackle the three big pillars of the strategy that are the Green Deal, the digital strategies of the European Union, and of course the European Pillar of Social Rights. These three elements will be really fundamental tools to achieve the results that we want to achieve together. Then there are also challenges still on the table, unfortunately, in front of us. The first one is that all this money will not be disbursed before the second half of this year. And it will take also time to have an effect on the real economy, on the labor market. In the meantime, we have to make sure that businesses and workers are not left behind, that we don't have an explosion of massive unemployment or many companies getting out of the markets. So it's very important to continue providing support through the emergency measures. And the other big challenge is if the institutions that will have the responsibility to design and implement, particularly the national recovery plans, will make the good use of this responsibility by significantly involving the social partners and the other civil society organizations in the design and implementation of these recovery plans. If this doesn't happen, it will be not only a missed opportunity, but it will make impossible to deliver in practice on the ground for the interest of people, I think.
Very interesting indeed, and I think you touched upon a whole host of issues. But I wanted to focus a little bit on the innovations that have been introduced thanks to this new recovery plan. You mentioned indeed the mutualization of debt as one new innovation, but of course also the streamlining of sustainability into these kind of policies. Do you think this is a sign of the direction a clear sign of the direction the EU wants to go, closer economic and monetary integration and deeper integration of sustainability and other considerations into its economic policies, or is it in one-off?
I think there is a real good willingness because, first of all, Ursula von der Leyen announced this change of path, change of strategy, already before the COVID pandemic exploded, already in her first speech in the parliament in 2019, and then in the work program of the Commission was very clear that there was a new impetus, I would say, a new momentum to push for innovation in macroeconomic terms, in terms of economic governance, and then, of course, in terms of the Green Deal, of digitalization and social issues. So there were already some elements of this innovation approach before we had the pandemic, but then of course the pandemic triggered even more ambition, I would say, among also many member states. This doesn't mean that there are no more enemies of innovation, that there are no more people around and organizations and institutions and politicians that would like really to be back to the old normal. But I have the impression, the conviction, if you want, that these, let's say, enemies of innovation are fortunately a minority. And they will not have the power to block the process. But of course, we bear the responsibility to make sure that this process can really deliver in practice, that we can really meet the expectations of citizens, people, workers and employers on the ground in Europe, to show that this change of paradigm is not only a slogan, is not only a way, to reassure people, we will overcome the crisis, but we can really make it. In this respect, it's very important what we are going to do in practice in the next few months.
I'll use this as an opportunity to perhaps talk a little bit about more political issues. We've seen the resurgence of populism, even authoritarianism in Europe and elsewhere in the world especially. And to a large extent, that resurgence has been caused by increase in inequality, an increase in the economic suffering of people even before the pandemic, but certainly now. Do you think that this is posing a risk for European democracy? Do you think that societies are becoming polarized and they're falling victim, perhaps, to populist tendencies because of the continuous economic crisis we've experienced over the last few years? Valeria, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, indeed, there is this big risk. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why SGI Europe is so active in EMI, why my membership decided to get involved in this kind of discussion, which is not typically, a typically employers discussion, but we represent services that are the closest to the students, essential services like healthcare, education, but also water provision, transport, energy. So we know and we feel, even before other kind of enterprises, what is the mood, what is the sentiment of the citizens. If you, much before the COVID, the yellow jackets in France were a great signal of this souffrance, even at European level, not just beyond European borders. So yes, there is a risk of rising populism, and it's our duty to have a say, not to be shy. We want Europe to be much bolder than it has been until now on the issue of democracy and rule of law. And that is why we believe that EMI is the right place to have this discussion and to bring it at the bigger level. As I said, this is not the kind of discussion, to be very frank with you, that we usually have in the social partnership field. We have been taking position on the rule of law, and this is something I'm also proud of, because I mean, it was not so often the case in the past that we were going beyond our borders, but there was a mutual recognition from both sides of industry that without rule of law, sound rule of law, democracy, respect, you can't even make good business in a country. So this is, I mean, there is a business case for the respect of the rule of law. But beyond this aspect of the business case, there is the part of the democracy and value that we represent and want to defend. And this make a great link with the conference on the future of Europe, where we believe we shouldn't have just a stock-taking exchange and exercise, where the European Commission trigger a kind of a mega consultation of what is going on the ground. But at the end of it, there is a real change and a real reinforcement of the aspect of democracy and the power of EU on the rule of law issue.
Luca, as a trade union leader, the trade union movement is, just like Valeria mentioned, quite close to the citizens, engaging millions of people. What's the sense you pick up from your members with regards to what Valeria just mentioned, this need to protect people, to show them a perspective, to make them feel engaged and involved in the European project, to defend also Europe as a result?
Well, the trade unions have always been on the side of democracy, as defenders of democracy in our tradition, in our history. I mean, since World War II and the reconstruction of Europe after World War II, we were part, of course, of all the democratic movements that have rebuilt democracy in our continent. So we are particularly keen, in analyzing the reasons why democracy can be at risk at the moment. And this is an analysis that we have conducted with our members much before the COVID outbreak started. It was already in preparation of the last European elections, because it's clear that there were already signals that those elections could have been highly risky, I would say, for reinforcing and defending European democracy in many, many countries. So we have even investigated the feelings and the opinions and the stance of our members when it comes to democracy, to participation, but also to what are, let's say, the major concerns and major priorities for our members when it comes to the interlocution between civil society, the world of work, and the institutional level. And what came out was already at that time that there were, and there are still, I think, two major problems, two major gaps, I would say, when it comes to the way the politicians, the institutions in the last couple of decades, I would say, have addressed the different crises and have tried, to put in place possible solutions. The first one is about the economy and the labor market, and the fact that, the economy has been weakened, and the growth that even started to taking place after the financial and economic crisis was very often a jobless growth without a real quality job creation, without a concrete, sustainable and inclusive economic model to be put in place, without the possibility to defend workers' rights in the workplaces, in the society, in the labor market. So the promises of a better growth, a new era after the financial crisis were not met by the politicians and by the institutions. On the contrary, the disruption of rights and protections was continuing, and there was no sufficient, I would say, quality job creation to rebalance the disaster of the financial crisis. And the other element of concern is that working people for sure, felt an increasing gap between the decision-making processes at national and European level and the possibility for citizens and working people to participate in these decision-making processes. Well, I think that these two major problems, so not seeing a perspective for the future in economic and social terms on the one side, and filling a gap between the institutions and people, these two problems still exist. They have been in part exacerbated, but in part also a bit hidden by the COVID pandemic. Because of course, in an emergency, you don't think about all this. You think about how you can overcome the emergency. But now these two elements come back to the challenge. Come back to the battle we have to fight and win. It's very important to make sure first that the recovery strategy finally this time will really help people overcoming inequalities and unemployment and social exclusion, etc., by rebuilding our European social model and our European well-being in an ambitious way. And on the other side, it's very, very important that this conference of the future of Europe is not, an empty shell just for institutional discussions. It has to go to the ground, to the real problems of the people, and politicians in the conference have to show that they are really able to take care of the needs of people, but also they are able to include people in their decisions. In the past, it was only the council, intergovernmental agreements, nothing else, all in closed rooms. Nobody could have not even an influence, not even information about what was going on. All this has really to change if we want to change the situation. If we want to really revive democracy, not only defend it, revive democracy, relaunch democracy. And we all of us, Emi, the social partners, our members can really play an important role, I think, in this respect.
Well, the stakes are indeed very high. And if we look back at European history, when we found ourselves in similar circumstances with pandemics, economic crisis, what followed has usually been a particularly ugly manifestation of human nature. And we need to make sure that those lessons of history are learned and we apply the solutions that have come out from those teachings. Since we're talking about perhaps a way out, you correctly mentioned the Conference of the Future of Europe, something that was launched when the new Commission took over and unfortunately had to be put on hold because of the pandemic, but there is discussion of reviving it and relaunching it not before long. Valeria, what is your ambition for the Conference on the Future of Europe as a social partner, representing employers, but also as a citizen, as a pro-European perhaps? What would you like to see the conference do?
I would like the conference to be able to bring changes. I mean, when the first presentation of the concept of the conference was issued by the Commission in 1 year ago, I mean, long time ago, with the pandemic in between. Already then, with no pandemic, I thought, okay, that's not ambitious enough. What was presented to me was really quite a communication exercise, going into, yes, even remote villages to hear from citizens and bring them the feeling of Europe and ask them what they want to have out of Europe. That's fine, but this should be the preparatory phase to bring us at the end result. And this need for a concrete result of the conference has exponentially grow because of the pandemic. So I really think that if at the end of the conference on the future of Europe there is not a significant change in the interinstitutional making, citizens will think, okay, this was a communication exercise. And I believe that also those who were skeptical 1 year ago about should we have or not have such a conference are now changing mind. And I can't be so explicit, but we have been meeting collectively as social partners, high-level officials to bring it, leave it at that level. Also from the council side, who would have told us 1 year ago, growth, green, digital conference of the future of Europe, is not really our priority. Their mind has changed since, and I'm happy about that. So they really see the potential of the conference to be the place, the forum for this change of paradigm. What my members would like to see out of it very concretely is a change of the system of economic governance, going much further into that. I wouldn't go into as far as a European Minister of Finance, but that's the wishful thinking, the very end of it. Then there is something where only a conference of the future of Europe would make a real change, and this is the EU for Health program. And there is no competence for Europe in the healthcare field, not yet, and the conference could help filling that gap. And then there is something that, if you ask me as a citizen, I would like to see out of it. The majority of my membership is on that track, but I can't say SGI Europe has that position. But then Valeria, as a citizen, would like to see transnational list for the next election, European election, to come out of it. To conclude on this point on the Conference of the Future of Europe, many of us might be frustrated by the fact that this was interrupted because of the pandemic, but in a way we have a chance to make it even more symbolic, at least linked to our EMI world. And if finally is going to take place in 2021, this conference will take place on the 80th anniversary of the Ventotene Manifesto, which is something quite important for the construction of Europe. So let's see it positively. If we finally start in 2021, we can also link it to this milestone for Europe.
Luca, you mentioned already a little bit, you touched upon the conference, but I would be interested to hear your views along the lines of what Valeria sketched. How do you see the conference and what are your aspirations for it?
Well, first of all, I will say that I really hope that the conference will happen, because at the moment, we are in the middle, as you know, of an institutional blockage that, by the way, is about very irrelevant topics like who should be the chair of the conference, instead of focusing on the content and the outcomes that should result from the conference. I really hope that this mediation, let's say compromise that President Antonio Costa is trying to push forward, that instead of being divided among the institutions about who should be the chair, they should have a collective chairship and proceed. I think that this attempt will succeed, because otherwise, if the kickoff of the conference doesn't happen in a couple of months at the latest, well, it will be impossible to respect the roadmap that was more or less agreed, in a way that the conference should conclude its work and come with proposals and outcomes during the French presidency. If the temporary window of opportunity is missed, then the conference is dead. We have to be very frank and pragmatic on this. So fingers crossed that the process will start. Then when it comes to our expectation about the conference, I will say there are three main expectations. The first one is that, as Valeria already said, the conference will really focus on the real things. That means how to reform our economic governance, our economic model, how to make sure that the recovery strategy is a success, not only in addressing the crisis, but also in building a new paradigm in terms of sustainability, inclusion, and so on and so forth. But also the conference should really reflect on the future. That means what kind of more green and more respectful for the environment world we want to build, how much we want to manage the injection of innovation in our economy, in our society, but at the same time protect the rights of people, how we want also to rebuild, as I said before, our European social model, making sure that our social market economy, Article 1 of our treaties, it becomes really a reality for everybody, etc., etc. So concrete things that can be really having an impact on the life of people and can really meet their expectations. The second element is that all this, of course, can be done through the normal, policy making of the European institutions and the governments. Okay, that's fine, but we are convinced that it won't be enough if we want really to build a new future. If we don't also discuss about possible treaty changes. We are really convinced that treaty changes must not be excluded from the scope of the conference. Unfortunately, there are too many in the institutional camp that would like to exclude any possible treaty changes, particularly in the Council, among governments. It will be a big mistake because there are many things that should be done in this respect. One overall is to try to move as much as possible from unanimity to qualified majority to make sure that we can really unlock some fundamental processes like taxation, for instance, just to mention one, on which, on the contrary, a more proactive and ambitious communitarian approach should be pushed forward, but also other elements like the one that Valeria mentioned, the need to have transnational lists, the need to have this principle of the Spitzenkandidat discussed further and try to establish it in a more stable way, in a way that we can really give the signal to voters when they go to the polls, that they can really elect someone in the leadership of the European Union, and so on and so forth. But if treaty changes will happen, for us it will be also fundamental that social rights will be finally enshrined clearly in the treaties, making sure that there is a balance, a correct balance between economic freedoms and social rights. And the very last point is about what kind of participation is envisaged for citizens and organized civil society in this conference. We have the impression that there is the temptation from some politicians to talk a lot about participation, but that to resolve this participation just in a top-down approach by organizing assemblies with randomly selected citizens, just to say, you know, we have put in place a real participation, we have listened to citizens, but then when it comes to taking really into account in a well-organized participation framework, the real inputs that can come from the civil society, well, this is not going to happen. That's why we are insisting so much on the need to involve social partners and other organizations of the organized civil society, the so-called intermediary bodies of the civil society in the setting and in the development of the conference. This will be really essential to have a concrete, meaningful involvement of citizens in the whole exercise, I think.
We would be surprised. Of course, we completely agree, and the European movement is an ideal platform to engage a variety of stakeholders, having the pleasure of working with trade unions, employers, NGOs, local governments, youth organizations, environmentalists, all the different stakeholders, because like you correctly said, this conference won't achieve its ambitious objectives if it's not inclusive and open to everyone to contribute. But I wanted to stay on this subject a little bit, because you both mentioned the citizen participation as well. And there are opportunities that technology can offer to engage citizens outside of the usual forum, people who have something to say, but they don't really have the right channel to communicate that. Do you think that this could be also a shift in the way we do democracy in Europe, away from gathering every 4 or 5 years to cast a vote and put our ballot in a box, and towards a more frequent discussion between citizens, stakeholders, but also the elected representatives and the decision makers, whether in the capitals or in Brussels? Is this an opportunity, to make it short, to really have that dialogue open throughout the electoral cycle, not just when we vote?
If you want, I start, because we keep the order. So, yes, of course, it is a big opportunity. It has to be well prepared. It shouldn't become a way, an excuse for those who then have to take the responsibility and the message through to say, okay, we had a good dialogue and we made our job, we are close to citizens. Is not easy exercise, because my point always in this participatory democracy is that, yes, it is fundamental, it is very important, it is essential that there is this link between the elected representative and their voters, to make it clear and simple all the way through. But then there is the moment where the mandate needs to be used. I mean, the commitment taken once you are elected need to be made real, and you need to deliver. So, you know, everything needs to be balanced, and there are two different things I have in mind here. On the one side, there is this, you know, increased awareness that this constant dialogue is so important. And here we have signaled that things are moving on. You know, this campaign, we all participated at the end of the day here around this table. This time I'm voting. It was very important, I think, because it was the way to make us all more aware, especially, I mean, I speak for me and my membership, that we can have a say also as citizens in the European election more than we had before, and that there is a wish and will from the European Parliament to keep this dialogue all over the way, not only in terms of election. Is going well, could be, there are improvements there to be made, but is a good philosophy, is a good signal. But the other side of the spectrum, and here I will put my Italian hat for a while, we shouldn't fall into the mistake that participatory democracy at the end of the day will sort out all the problems, and that this constant civil society dialogue, ground level dialogue will sort out all problems. And I take the liberty to mention a movement that in our country, in my country, Italy, where I am voting when I vote for election, at least for the moment, is Movimento 5 Stelle, is the proof that this idea that each and every citizen can have a direct access to change in policy and politics doesn't work always. So my point is that we have to make a balance, and a right balance between this participatory democracy wish and goodwill, and the fact that at a certain moment, those who have the mandate need to act upon what they have collected from citizens. It was a bit difficult the way I explained it, but I hope it went through.
It's a difficult subject, like you said. How exactly do we find that balance? We're hosting this conversation. We're just a few meters away from the European Parliament, which is the House of Citizens. Directly elected members of the European Parliament are here to represent European citizens, and it's not an easy job by any stretch of imagination. Look at the trade union movement. You have millions of members, and you engage them quite actively into your decision-making processes and those outcomes. Are there any lessons we can take from that when we are designing the conference, but when we're all generally considering European democracy at large?
Well, you know, we as the trade unions, but more in general as social partners, we have some, let's say, quite well-structured and also, I would say, institutionalized forms of participation. The top level of those is for sure social dialogue that is very well developed at the European level, is fortunately developing some European member states, not in all. So we have, first of all, as social partners, the responsibility to strengthen and relaunch as much as possible this instrument that is very precious we have in our hands, to make sure that at least companies and workers can be properly involved in all the decision-making processes, especially when they address their own specific interests. We have a lot to do still at the European level to reinforce the social dialogue frameworks and to make sure that our discussions, negotiations, and agreements can really be implemented in practice. And we have also a lot to do in cooperation with the European Commission to make sure that social dialogue can become really a practice that works properly on the ground in each and every member state. But I will say even at local level, because also the local level dimension is very important, especially if we want to manage properly the just transition processes towards a more green and more digital economy. If you don't do it at the local level, you don't have any chance to succeed. But, this is for us. It's not enough for everybody. Social dialogue doesn't cover everything when it comes to the necessary participation of citizens to the decision-making processes of the institutions at all levels. There is a need to imagine new structures, new ways, new method, I will say, for a proper participation that we don't see yet happening properly. There are some forms of so-called civil dialogue in some countries, also at the European level on some specific areas. There is also this precious instrument of the European and national economic and social committees, where social partners together with civil society can participate in the formation of the decisions and in the different legislative and institutional processes. We have also many forms of informal institutional dialogue at many levels, but my impression is that, as I said, all this is not enough. We need really to think about more, because otherwise we will fall in the trap Valeria was describing, that is this populistic approach to participative democracy, let's call it like that. For those that think that clicking on a like or just posting something, a comment or whatever in a chat is enough, to implement democratic participation. We have seen that, unfortunately, this is the worst enemy of democracy. More and more, this becomes dangerous for democracy itself because it's a vehicle for fake news and pretends to put in place participation when only a few hundred people participate in an actual discussion, with no method for controlling how the decisions then are taken, even by those parties that call themselves movements, and they use these kind of methods to form their own decisions at political level. So between these two extremes, a very institutionalized dialogue on the one side that exists and has to be improved, and on the other side is completely liquid and with no form, participation of citizens through the net, through the web. Well, we need to find something in the middle that can really establish new forms and innovative forms of participation in our democracy if we want to save the concept of participation and implement it in practice, I think. And I think that the Conference of the Future of Europe should also discuss about this. What kind of new forms of participation should be created to make sure that really citizens can have access to the decision-making processes at the different levels.
Before we move to the next stage of our conversation, we look at the world at large beyond Europe. I want to stay on the conference because it has also generated a lot of interest on social media with comments and questions. For example, Nicola is asking, how would you imagine the inclusion of organized civil society in the conference? The European Parliament's proposal doesn't feature a role for organized civil society in the plenary of the conference. What kind of innovations would you consider appropriate to make sure that the expertise of civil society can feed into the conference? Valeria, perhaps you can go first.
We shouldn't bring our debate and make the same mistake institutions are making about who is chairing, who is getting a seat. I think we need to be focused on the result. It will be impossible to feature everybody in the plenary. And here we have two solutions. One is that we use technology in fitting and featuring this participation. But we have just discussed about the limits of this methodology, because yes, you can tweet, you can even have a short speaking time and then go back to your constituency and say, oh, I was there, we spoke, we made our point. But this point, I'm sorry, will not make a change, will not make a difference, because it will be lost in the flow of communication. The other way that Luca and I offered already to the EMI is that those who will eventually have a seat, because it's not even granted for social partners, take the role of taking the message and representing a bigger constituencies than the usual one. So those who will be there commit to also bring the voice of civil society. And again, this is one of the very reasons why at least SGI Europe is in EMI, because we want to bring and take the voice beyond our borders. I think this is a very effective way of thinking and will not distract us from the content discussion that we want to have at the Conference on the Future of Europe.
Luca, what do you think? I mean, the offer by Valeria is very welcome, and I know that you and the ETUC has also offered something along those lines. But any other ideas of how organized civil society could be made part? I agree, we don't need to have a sit around the table for everyone. It would be a very big table and nobody will be able to see or hear themselves, and that's a problem. But any ideas you have?
Well, first of all, I think that we need to continue the battle to have as many representatives of social partners and civil society as possible in the plenary of the conference. Of course, there will be a limited size for this conference, especially because it's very likely that the first event of the conference, the first plenary session, will take place during lockdowns. So it will be very difficult to have so many people, at least in presence, I mean, participating in this plenary. But in any case, I think we need to insist with the three institutions that a strong, significant presence of representatives of social partners and organized civil society should be involved in the plenary. The second element, even more important if you want, is that a selected number of representatives of civil society should be part of the, let's say, task force or whatever you want to call it, that is going to run the conference, because it's not only about being in the plenary. You know, as Valeria said, you make your intervention, you are very happy with that, I mean, and then you go back to your constituency and say, I made my point, you know, in that plenary. But then if there is not a good organization behind that makes sure that a few organizations of the civil society participate in the design and in running the conference in all its own steps until the very end when the results will be discussed, well, our participation in the plenary is at risk of being absolutely insignificant. And the third element that I have to say is already considered by the European Commission and by the other institutional actors is that we are asked as social partners and civil society organizations to organize or to contribute to organize a series of events, preparatory events at the European level, but particularly specific events at national and local level, where we can help gathering our members, the members of our members, decentralized level, I mean, in a way that we can help the European Union in gathering people concretely and not just through a chat, as I said before. And I want to tell you that we as the ETUC, but I'm sure also Valeria and the other employers organizations, we are also absolutely open to consider joint events. So we could even envisage that together with EMI and other members of the EMI, we could have some joint activities that we can organize in the different countries, particularly, but also at the European level, where we can help each other let's say, in bringing together as many inputs as possible we can have from our different memberships when it comes to our suggestions and proposals to be brought to the attention of the conference. So I would say at least these three things should be done: making sure that we are in the plenary, making sure that we are in the steering, let's say, group of the conference to have a real influence on the process, and then proactively organize some common activities, particularly on the ground, to make sure that we can channel our inputs together to give them more strength, I would say, and more influence in terms of impact.
Yeah. Very welcome indeed, and very good ideas, and we're going to follow up on them. There are a few more points, but I think we have touched upon them. So I'll maybe take this opportunity to look beyond our shores and to the rest of the world, where several challenges are still taking place. First, considering yesterday was the inauguration of the new President of the United States, I would welcome your views on that. We had a long period of instability on the other side of the Atlantic that has affected also the relationship between the US and the EU, two significant pillars of the Western world. So I'm curious, how do you think the relationship now can shift? Is there scope for closer cooperation in pursuing our joint objectives with the United States, or you foresee a period of, again, internal reflection from our American allies while they repair some of the damage done in the last few years? Valeria, what do you think?
I think that President Biden immediately gave the sign of the shift and the new paradigm. He really made it real. The fact that they came back immediately on day one on the Paris agreements. So, I mean, multilateralism, I think, will go back to is good normal. Usually, I mean, the business as usual is using a negative effect, but when it comes to the US, we were looking forward to the business as usual in this sense. I am less worried than on the US than on other moves of Europe when it comes to external relations. I very much agree on the fact that Europe should be the leader and the front runner in many fields. Sustainability and green should be one of those. But then, and here I speak as a citizen and convinced European rule of law and democracy believer, I wonder how all this is coherent with the trade agreement just concluded with China. Here, I'm not speaking SGI Europe. As we are in a European chat, and you say this in an informal setting. I just wonder, as a citizen, how is it possible? So I would say that before going and look on the other side of the Atlantic, is Europe itself that first of all should really consider carefully what do we want to achieve, what's the aim of external relation, and do we agree that respect of rules, human rights should be the condition sine qua non, something on which you can't make any kind of concession. So first of all, it should be crystal clear that the answer to this question should be yes, and then we go ahead.
Luca, how do you view the new president, and what effect do you think will have in relations between the EU and the US?
Well, I think the effects cannot be other than super positive, of course. It was a disaster with Trump in general, in the US, and also for the relationship with the EU and with the rest of the world. So we really trust Biden in this respect. Also, we know from the inside, thanks to the American trade unions with which we are in constant contact, that the new cabinet of Biden and his work program are very well designed in this respect to rebuild global multilateralism and also to relaunch the relationships with the European Union. By the way, the US have concluded a very progressive and advanced agreement when it comes to international trade. That is the new NAFTA, the USMCA trade agreement, where we have really welcomed, together with the American trade unions, very ambitious mechanism for enforcement of labor and social rights that don't exist in any of the European agreements. So we really hope that actually Biden will push the European Union for more ambition. It's true what you say, that of course in this moment it's very important for Biden to concentrate on the horrible disruption that the COVID pandemic has brought to the US economy and labor market, but it's also true that from the really beginning he declared his interest in relaunching the relationship with the European Union. So I don't see a risk of let's say closeness or any kind of blockage coming from the United States. On the contrary, I think the United States will restart the process very soon, and we have to be ready also as social partners to cooperate very strictly with our colleagues on the other side of the ocean to make sure that we can accompany this process. One of the big challenges that exist in the US when it comes to social partnership is the fact that there is no social dialogue in the US, there is no collective bargaining in the US, so we need also to help as European social partners, our colleagues over the ocean, to try to build a more ambitious and comprehensive system of industrial relations and social dialogue in that country, because this will help also make social dialogue and industrial relations progressing at the global level and in the relationships, of course, between the EU and the US. When it comes to the European Union, we have seen all the positive messages that President von der Leyen, President Michel, President Sassoli, everybody has delivered when Biden has initiated his mandate yesterday. But still, there are some concerns. Valeria referred to some of these concerns in the sense that I have the impression that the European Union didn't reflect enough on what it means to relaunch the relationships with the US, on what and to do what. Because what has been done on the 30th of December by signing this nasty agreement with China, it goes exactly in the opposite direction. Not only because it's a nasty agreement in itself that disregards completely human rights and is so naive in thinking that China can really implement any of the commitments, very few commitments, by the way, they have subscribed in the agreement, but it's also a total misleading assessment of the impact that an agreement like this could have in negative terms on the relaunch of our relationship with the United States. So I really hope that in the 1 year and a half we have in front of us for the final ratification of this agreement, it will be possible to introduce, as we call them, radical amendments, radical changes in the substance of this agreement, in a way that on the one side we have more balanced relationship with China, and on the other side we can also reshape our international policy in a way that this can help and not introduce blockages when it comes to the relaunch of our relationship with the United States. So I'm quite confident and optimistic from the US side. I'm a bit more worried about some contradictions that I see in the European policy in approaching this point.
Very interesting indeed, and I think both partners, the US and China, are hugely important for also the future of the European Union. Because the fact that we find ourselves often sandwiched between those continent-sized powers forces us also to appreciate a bit more our own community and the need to work together closer, to project our values and to be able to strike good deals for European citizens. Perhaps in the couple of remaining minutes, I shouldn't waste the opportunity of having, by accident, two Italians here for the conversation. Italian politics always generate quite a lot of excitement. I remember as a student of politics myself, Studying European political history, it was always, my favorite chapter was the one on Italian politics. And recently we have seen a little bit of drama there. If you care, you don't have to, of course, but if you care to share some of your insights about the situation there and how it might affect European affairs also.
I will. I don't know. It's like a keep calm. I mean, state sereni, I would say in Italian, and if there is some Italians listening to us and watching us, will understand. They will understand the joke. But I think that for the future, immediate future, and concern that there are around the next generation EU and recovery, and the fact that this crisis, which is a purely not institutional, but a crisis created by politicians for politicians. I think that with a kind of magic, there has been the capacity to block it at the level that will ensure at least that Italy will be able to deliver on its commitment towards the recovery plan and next generation EU. I think it's the first time ever that Italy received such an amount of money from the European Union. So to waste this opportunity would be just crazy. And I am confident and hopeful that the new government or the follow-up of this government will be able to stick to the commitment. There is quite a good amount of serious, competent, loyal and pro-European people right now taking the pen for the recovery plan that I think and hope Italy will not be a big deceivement for Europe, because we knew since the start that Italy was a special case. I mean, sorvegliato speciale, we say in Italian. We were being looked at very closely, and to deceive the trust that we have been receiving by European institutions would be the biggest mistake ever. So I want to be positive. After the drama, I think now we can keep on working.
Well, Italian politics is a bit like a casino roulette. No, you have a lot of gamblers in there that make the situation in a way that you can win everything or go to bankruptcy in 5 minutes. And unfortunately, in this specific crisis, that it was a completely nonsense crisis because it was based on nothing, I will say, except for the ego and personality of some gamblers that are still going around, although they have lost every power. So they try to resuscitate themselves by playing these nasty games. Having said that, and I don't want to add anything else on this, I think that what is most important now is exactly what Valeria was emphasizing, that the old new government, let's say, because some changes will be done, of course, in the composition of the cabinet of Prime Minister Conte, but it's still the same government, although with some changes. The old new government must now repair some damages and fill some gaps that unfortunately were there before this political crisis and now have to be really addressed immediately. I refer to the fact that while during the first lockdown, so during the real emergency at the beginning of the pandemic, the Italian government shown to be very responsible and to involve social partners, civil society in all the discussions and negotiations to make sure that the health of people was protected, that schools were protected, that healthcare system was protected, etc. when we moved from the first emergency to the need of imagining and designing the recovery, the government forgot completely any form of social dialogue and civil dialogue. And this was a big mistake that exacerbated the political crisis instead of resolving it. We have heard too many ministers in Italy, but also in other countries, say, this is not time for social dialogue. This is time to come back to normal because we are in an emergency. We need to take decisions quite quickly. We cannot lose time in consulting anybody. And the result is that they lost a lot of time and they didn't deliver. So now is really time, on the contrary, to consult, to speed up, and to do it well. In this respect, there is a good sign that the day after the crisis was resolved, the Prime Minister convened for tomorrow the social partners to discuss the national recovery plan. So we've crossed fingers. We are hopeful that from this first meeting on the recovery plan, the first after months, finally something positive will come out. So let's see.
Well, optimism is always the best way to finish a conversation. And before nothing else, I want to thank you both for giving us so much of your valuable time. The conversation was fascinating. A lot of the feedback reflects that we got. I would also like to thank all those of you watching. This program will be also on video on our YouTube channel, that you can watch it again and share it, of course, and invite you to join us again. In a month's time, we're going to have another edition of the European Chat, this time featuring the European Council of Municipalities and Regions, bringing the local government perspective, and Europa Nostra bringing a more cultural perspective in our conversation about future and Europe. Again, thank you very much. Happy New Year, and looking forward to seeing you all soon. Goodbye.